In this second video of the HTTP client series, we are going to study how to do a HTTP post with the HTTP client. If you want to follow along with me, you can use the GitHub repository in the description of this video, and you can go to the begin folder. This is video 2. So let's get started. Here we are in our people controller, and I created this HTTP post action in which we are creating a person in the database, and also we are receiving a person as a parameter of the action and also returning the ID of the newly created person. If we go to the person class, you can see that this is only ID and name properties. There are only these two properties here. And so let's go to the program class, which is our console application, and let's get to work. First, as you can see, we have the URL here and JSON serializer options here for when we want to deserialize anything from the web API. And before using our HTTP client to send a HTTP post to our web API, we need to make sure that the web API is running. So let's go here to API, right click, open folder in File Explorer. I can right click here, open git bash, and I can write here .NET watch run, enter, and that is going to run our web API, and it also open our Swagger UI. And as you can see, we have post API people endpoint here. So let's go to Visual Studio and let's get to work. We're going to start with a simple example, example 1. Here we're going to instantiate a new person, so we're going to call it new person equal to new person, and we're going to say name Felipe. And now you may know that in order to use post in the HTTP client class, we can use PostAsync, but that is not what we're going to do. First, what we're going to do is to use another more easier version of this post method, which is PostAsJsonAsync. So let me say here PostAsJsonAsync, control dot to bring this namespace, system.net HTTP JSON. And what this method does is to keep it really simple for us to issue a HTTP post. Here we have to pass the URL and also the value that we want to send, new person in this case. And this method is going to serialize this and send a application JSON to our web API, and that's it. Now here I can say var response equal to await, because this is asynchronous. And if you remember, from here we are returning the ID of the newly created person. So I want to say if response is success, then I want to get that ID. So I will say here ID equal to await response content read as a string async, and here I will say console write line, and I want to say the ID is, and I want to concatenate this ID here. And also I want to retrieve all of the people from the database. So I will say here people equal to, and I will do a one-liner. I will say JSON serializer deserialize list of person, and I will pass await HTTP client get a string async, and I will pass the URL. And also, as we saw in the previous video, we have to use the JSON serializer options with the name case insensitive activated. And let me put a semicolon here, and in this one-liner we're retrieving and deserializing the response from this endpoint that we have here into a list of person. So let me put a breakpoint here and let me press F5. Let me make sure that we have the console project selected as the startup project, and now let me press F5 to run our application in debugging mode. And here we have the ID is 1, which is perfect, and also in the list of people I have here Felipe, an ID of 1 of course, which means that we are indeed using this PostAsJsonAsync to issue a HTTP post to our web API. Now, what if you don't want to use application JSON? Maybe you want to send an XML or something like that. In that case, you can use the PostAsync method that we mentioned earlier. So let's do that. Let's learn how to use that PostAsync method. Let me say here example2, and I will say here var new person2 equal to new person name Claudia, and let's see what we need to do to use that PostAsync method. I will say response here await HttpClient PostAsync. I want to use this one, and first I have to pass the URL that is normal, but second I have to pass this HTTP content. What is that? Let's go here F12, and let me click on here F12 again, and this HTTP content class is an abstract class which represents whatever content, whatever payload I want to send to the web API. Now, as you can see, this is an abstract class, which means that we cannot instantiate, which means that we need to use a child class for that. And the one that we're going to use is the string content class. So first, in order to use the string content class, we need a string. So I will serialize this to a string. So I will say new person to serialized equal to JSON serializer serialize, and I will pass the new person. Now I have a string representation of this object in this variable, and now I can use the string content object. So let me say string content equal to new string content, and I want to pass the content, which is new person to serialize. I can pass an encoding. I can say encoding control dot to bring system text, and I can say UTF-8, and also I can say the media type. Here I can say application JSON, but also I could use, if I wanted, XML if I am sending an XML or something like that. In my case, I will just use JSON. But as you can see, with this PostAsync method, we have more control over what we are sending, because here we are forced to use JSON, but here we could use XML, for example. So let me pass here this string content, and let me put a semicolon here, and let me come here because I want you to see something. If I press F12 here, you can see that this string content class inherits from byte array content, and if I press F12 here, you can see that byte array content inherits from HTTP content, and that is why I can use a string content in here. Now we can make a test. Let me press F5, and let me see that now in this list of people, I have now 2 people. As you can see, we have Felipe, but also we have Claudia, which means that this PostAsync method works. Now, what happens if we get a validation error? For example, let's say that name is required. First, let me see what happens if I send a person without a name. I will comment this out because I don't want this to be running every time I run the application. I will say example3 validations, and I want to say new person 3 equal to new person, and I will say that this person doesn't have a name, and I want to use our PostAsJsonAsync method. So I will copy this from here, and I will paste it here, and I will copy this and substitute this here, and I shouldn't have commented this out, so let me put it right here, and let me uncomment it out. And now I want to press F5 one more time just to see what happens. We can see that now we have 3 people, and we have ID 3 and name null for the 3rd person, but maybe we don't want that. Maybe we want to make the name field required, and that is fine. We can certainly do that. We can come here and say required, control dot to bring this namespace, and that's it. Now I can see that we get an error from the web API if we send a person with a null name. Let's see that. Let me say if response status code equal to bad request, then we are going to enter this block of code. I want to see what we receive from the web API in this case. So I will say here body, this is the response body, and I want to say response content with a string async, and of course we have to use the await operator. And now I will say console write line body. Now let me see what we get. Let me press Ctrl F5, and as you can see, we have this error here. This is the error that we get from the web API. This is the response, and in this response we have this errors property here which says name, the name field is required, which is exactly what we were expecting. But now how can we extract this information from here to display it in a friendly manner to the user. For that, we're going to parse this response and extract this and convert it into a dictionary. So let's do that. Let me close this and let me open the Solution Explorer because I want to create a new class which will be a utility class. So I will say here utils and I will make it public, and I want to have a static method here. So I'll say static, and this method will return a dictionary which will be of type string list of a string. The reason for this is that this string here, this key of the dictionary, is going to represent the field or property of the class that has the validation error, and these lists represent the list of errors of the property because a property can have several errors. So let me say here extract errors from web API response, and I will say here string body, and let's get to work here. I will say first response equal to new, and I will copy this from here because I want to initialize the final dictionary and I want to return it from here, and in between these lines we're going to parse the response. Let me say first JSON element. We're going to use something called JSON element, which will allow us to work with a arbitrary JSON structure that comes from the web API. So I will say JSON serializer, control dot to bring this namespace, and I will deserialize to JSON element, and I will pass the body, and then from here I can get the errors property that you saw on the console. So I will say errors JSON element equal to JSON element, and make sure that you are selecting this same JSON element dot get property errors, and now here I have the information of that property. Now I want to issue a for each because I want to iterate all of the properties of the errors attribute, because I want to iterate all of the properties of errors. That is because we can have several fields with errors. So I will say here field with errors, and here I will say errors JSON element enumerate object, and here I will say field. Here we can get the name of the field, so field with errors, and I will say name, and let me rename this because we have a typo here, errors. And now let me say here errors equal to new list of a string, and now I want to iterate the array of errors of the corresponding field. So I will say for each again error kind, and here I will say field with errors value enumerate array because the value of this property is an array of errors, and here I can say error equal to error kind dot get a string, and now I can say errors at error, and finally I can say response at, and I can add the field as the key and the list of errors as the value. And that's actually it. With this we can come here, and I can come here, I can delete this console write line from here because we were just using it as an example. And now I can say var errors from web API equal to utils dot extract errors from web API response body. And now here we're going to do the following. We're going to say for each field with errors from web API, and I will say console write line, and I will use a string interpolation, and here I will put the field. So I will say field with errors key, and then I will say for each one more time, and here I will have errors, and here I will say field with errors value, and here I will say console write line double spaces, and I want to use a string interpolation, and I want to say error here, and that's it. With this we're good to go. Let me press Ctrl F5 to test this, and as you can see here we have our errors in a friendly manner. We have name, and the name field is required, and this works even if you have several errors. For example, if we come here and let me just add a few test properties like age and email, let me say a string email, and in age I want to say range from 0 to 120, and then here in email I want to say email address, and now I want to come to program, and in this person I want to say age equal to -1 and also email equal to abc, which is not a valid email address. So let me press Ctrl F5 one more time, and you are going to see that we get the errors of each field, of the age field, of the name field, and of the email field, which means that we were able to parse the errors from the web API. So in this video you learn how to use the PostAsYsonAsync method that allows you to issue a simple HTTP post request to our web API, and also you learn that if you want to have more flexibility on the format of what you're sending, for example, if you want to send an XML, you can use PostAsync that allows you to specify the media type of the content that you are sending, and also you learn how to parse the typical error messages from an ASP.NET Core web API. If you like this video, please make sure to subscribe to my channel and let me know what you want me to cover next. Thanks!